Welcome to the webinar Climate Technologies and Technology Needs Assessment Activities in Asia Pacific. This webinar is hosted by UNEP DTU Partnership in relation to the Technology Needs Assessment Project, TNA, and is organized in collaboration with the UNFCCC, the Green Climate Fund, the Asian Institute of Technology, and the Ministry of Environment of Armenia. My name is Leah. I'm working for the TNA project at UNEP DTU, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar. So a couple of things before we move to the main content of our webinar. The session will last around 80 minutes, and we will conclude this time for a Q&A session. So you will be muted during this webinar, and you're more than welcome to write your questions through the chat box on the right during the presentations from the speakers. And please, I would ask you to remember to indicate the name of the speaker your question is asked to. If you're not able to stay until the end of the session, or if you want to access our presentations again, no worries. A recording of the webinar will be available online in a few days on the TNA website. You should see the address at the end of this slide. So you will find this link here and also on the last slide. Okay, so regarding the agenda of the day, we will start with Subash, who will introduce the TNA project in Asia Pacific, and he will provide a regional overview. Then Vladimir will share UNFCCC perspectives on the TNA process and will be followed by Tigran, who will present national perspectives on the TNA process in Armenia. Then Sivanappan will explain the role of the regional center in Asia in supporting Asia-Pacific countries in their TNA process. Jens will share perspective from the UNFCCC Regional Center in Asia-Pacific, and we will finish with Emerson, who will provide insights from the GCF. So then, as I mentioned before, comes the time for a Q&A session, and our panelists will answer the question you might have. During this Q&A session, we will have the participation additionally of Rubik Shahazian from the Environmental Project Implementation Unit at the Ministry of Environment of Armenia. And he will be able to answer your questions regarding climate change adaptation in Armenia. So before we start, I would like to inform you that we comply with the General Data Protection Act, also known as GDPR. So it means that your personal data, such as name, email, and workplace, is safely processed and stored, and you have the rights in relation to the GDPR. So they are respected, and you have full access to the data that is being processed about you, and at any time you can request that this data is deleted or rectified. If you have any question on this, please contact Aris and Louise. Now let me introduce the speakers of today's webinar. Subash Dhar. He is a senior economist at UNEP DTU Partnership, and he has a strong experience in working with most countries within Asia Pacific region. He is the TNA Regional Coordinator for Asia Pacific. His research interests include sustainable urban transport, low carbon development in developing countries, technology transfer, and climate change. He has published many papers on these topics, and he is a lead author for the transport chapter of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Then we have Vladimir Hecl. Vladimir Hecl is Program Officer at the UNFCCC in Bonn, in Germany. In 2006, Vladimir joined the Technology Implementation Team of the UNFCCC, and he's working in technology negotiations and in technology needs assessments of non-Annex 1 parties to the UNFCCC. So these projects include both mitigation and adaptation technologies. And before that, Vladimir worked over 10 years at the Energy Center Bratislava and at the Intelligent Europe Energy Agency of the European Commission. Tigran Sekoyan works at the Ministry of Environment of Armenia, and he has been a TNA coordinator in relation to mitigation activities during the TNA process in Armenia. So Tigran has professional experience as a manager, engineer, and consultant in the energy efficiency, renewable energy, and greenhouse gases inventory. but also in climate change mitigation measures impact assessment. So he has extended knowledge of TNAs, energy auditing and monitoring, and local legislation. Then Mr. Sivanappan Kumar, he's a professor in energy studies at the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Change of the Asian Institute of Technology. So this institute is as well the TNA regional center in the region. And his research topics include renewable energy, resource assessment, solar thermal and PV technologies, but also energy efficiency in buildings and industry, and of course, TNAs for greenhouse gas mitigation. Jens Radschinski, since 2017, he is the head of the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for Asia Pacific, which is located in Bangkok. Jens supports project participants and designated national authorities on the implementation of clean development mechanism projects, and he also leads all other activities that the center is undertaking in the region, and it's namely in the fields of green finance, carbon markets, NDC support, and global climate action. And finally, Emerson Resende. He is a climate policy specialist at the Green Climate Fund, which is in South Korea. So he advised the fund on issues related to technology development and transfer. And he also guides the implementation of directions received from the UNFCCC Conference of the Parties. So I will now give the floor to Subash, who will introduce the TNA projects.
This is Subash. I'm the regional coordinator for Asia Pacific region. I will be providing an introduction to the TNA project in the Asia Pacific region, and my presentation would be covering three elements: a very brief overview of the TNA process. This will be followed by the outputs of the TNA project in the Asia Pacific region, and give a brief overview of what countries have produced within the TNA reports. And I will then end the presentation with some examples of how the countries have taken forward the TNA process from the TAP onwards towards implementation side. So first of all, when we look at the TNA process, we have a very stepwise approach in the TNA process. And it comprises of three steps. And the first step deals with what we call the TNA step, which involves prioritization of technologies within, you can say, chosen sectors within the countries. Generally, the countries choose two sectors on the mitigation side and two sectors on the adaptation side. And within these sectors, then they prioritize 2 to 3 technologies which are taken forward for the next step. And the prioritization of the technologies happens using criteria which are related to the developmental priorities of the countries and the contribution to mitigation and adaptation. And once this prioritization exercise is done with the help of stakeholders within the countries, we have, you can say, a set of around, you can say around 8 to 9 technologies overall, and around 3 technologies per sector. We now try to see what are the enabling environments which are prevailing in the countries, which can help in wider diffusion of the technologies, or could be impeding the diffusion of these technologies. And these the analysis of the enabling conditions helps us in understanding what are the barriers for their technology. And based on the barriers we identify, we try to find what are the, you can say, improvements in the enabling conditions that can be undertaken so that there is a wider diffusion of these technologies. And this results in what we have in the TNS process, the barrier analysis and enabling framework reports, which concludes with a set of measures for overcoming these barriers. The final step in the TNA process is this technology action plan. Now, the technology action plans takes forward the measures we have identified within the barrier analysis and enabling framework report, and it tries to then identify an overall ambition for the technology and assign who are the individuals who would be responsible for implementing the various activities and actions, and also assigning some kind of budgets and time plan for that. So it tries to prepare some kind of an overall program for the implementation of the technology. We have been implementing the technology needs assessment project in the country since 2009 in close collaboration with UNFCCC and CTCN and the technology mechanism. Now, coming to the what we are doing within the Asia Pacific region. Within the Asia Pacific region, we have been implementing the TNA project in collaboration initially with Asian Institute of Technology. Professor Kumar would be having a presentation in the end. And since TNA phase 3, since we had a number of countries in the Pacific region, we have added University of South Pacific as the other regional center. Within the region, we provide the support to the countries in the form of regional capacity building workshops. And for each round of countries, we have around 3 workshops, basically covering the 3 outputs of the TNA or 3 steps of the TNA. And in addition to this, regional centers also provide technical support missions to the countries depending on the request from the countries. There are also national trainings, for example, which are conducted during the inception missions, which are conducted by UDP together with the regional centers. And beyond this, there is the help desk, which is operated by the regional centers, and there are e-learning materials, guidebooks, and tools which are available on the TNA project website. There are also within country, you can say understandings and agreements with the countries to support the TNA process. And there is always within the countries a TNA coordinator who is coordinating the stakeholder inputs and the work of the consultants within the TNA to conduct the stakeholder consultations, etc. If we look now at what countries have prioritized within the TNA project in Asia. So this slide shows you the priority sectors in Asia for both adaptation and mitigation. First, at the top is the priority sectors for adaptation, and you can see that agriculture and water have been prioritized by most countries. In fact, this graph is drawn for 22 countries. So you can say that in agriculture was prioritized by 19 out of the 22 countries. And similarly, water was prioritized, were priority sector for 18 countries out of 22. In terms of mitigation, energy has been a sector which was prioritized by roughly all the countries. And transport was the second most prioritized sector within the region. If we now move down to the priority technologies within these sectors, so we look at the 2 most prioritized sectors, agriculture and water, for the adaptation. And here we can look at what are the technologies countries are prioritizing. And you can see that crop diversification and new varieties of crops and farming system and cropping management have been the 2 most prioritized technologies within the agriculture sector. Similarly, when we are looking at the water sector, it is water catchment and water harvesting and water management have been the most prioritized technologies within the adaptation sector. Similarly, on the mitigation side, we have energy and transport were the 2 most prioritized sectors. And within these sectors, if we look at the energy sector, solar energy, bioenergy, both renewable sources of energy have been the most prioritized technologies. Within transport sector, it is traffic management and public transportation, which have been the most prioritized technologies. I would encourage you to look at the TNA reports which are available on the TNA project website to get a better understanding of the technology priorities of the countries, because what we are presenting here are, you can say, a very broad category of technologies. For example, if you look at solar energy as a technology, there could be solar home systems, there could be solar grid scale solar technologies, or solar PV systems, or concentrated solar power systems. So strongly encourage you to look at the TNA reports which are available on the TNA project website. Now, I would also like to emphasize that these technology priorities wouldn't require you can say enabling as a good enabling environment for implementation of these technologies. And this graph is telling you about the specific enabling measures which have been implemented in the countries, and economic and financial and legal and regulatory are the two you can say enabling measures which have been most common within the countries, and there are all other kinds of enabling measures which have been identified within the countries. Finally, I would like to give you an overview of two examples. One is from Indonesia and the other one is from Pakistan. Indonesia was a TNA phase, you can say phase 1 country, and it completed TNA in 2012. And hydrodynamic modeling for Jakarta was one of their priority technologies. And they took forward the implementation of this technology option using support from CTCN for flood hazard mapping and hydrological modeling. And they also used this support from CTCNs to subsequently integrate this technology within their NDC. The second example I would like to present is for Pakistan, which had BRT as a priority within their TNA, and it was also a high priority within their province of Sindh. But this project was having very high capital cost, and despite having very high capital costs and low revenues, they were able to implement it with grants from the provincial governments, loans from ADB, and also grants from GCF and concessional loans from GCFs. So through, you can say, complex financial structuring, they could achieve an implementation of the project. I would finally end my presentation with this slide, which is giving links to both the TNA project website and also the web page on the UNFCCC website, where you can gather a lot of more important information about the TNA project. And with this, I would like to end my presentation, and I would like to hand over my next to Vladimir from UNFCCC, who would provide you and a linkage between the TNA and the UNFCCC processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Subash. Let me build on your very nice opening and overview of good work you do on the technology needs assessment of developing countries, and go straight ahead on where the UNFCCC stays in this. In 2015 in Paris, in relation to technologies, parties to the UNFCCC shared the vision in a long term of importance of fully realizing technology development and transfer. That's in order to improve resilience to climate change and also to reduce greenhouse gas emission. They established a new technology framework, building on the one we had used until 2015 in the Secretariat. And this is basically to provide a guidance to the work of technology mechanism, which is both Technology Executive Committee as its policy arm and Climate Technology Center and Network as an implementation arm, to promote and facilitate action on technology development and transfer. And also parties agree to strengthen their cooperative action in relation to technology development and transfer, and agreed that the mechanism composed with the previously mentioned two bodies, and you will see probably a bit later, shall serve the Paris Agreement. Now, to operationalize Paris Agreement and what I've mentioned before, the Conference of Parties made a decision which requested parties to collaborate to elaborate a technology framework. And what is important within the framework for the TNA world, let's say, or technology needs assessment, is looking at implementation, looking at project development, and looking at connecting this developed or pre-developed project with efforts of investors and bankers to have projects with a vision to be bankable. For this, an enhanced financial and technical support was considered as a must, and also access technologies that are ready to transfer, and also enhance enabling environments in these countries that they enable such a transfer, look at the existing barriers, and look at possible enablers to overcome these barriers. Now, if we look from a sort of helicopter perspective to the technology framework, we see 5 themes in there, and as you could indicate from my previous talk, where TNA is mainly discussed is the implementation theme. And now also Technology Executive Committee, as a policy arm of technology mechanism, is having a similar distribution of its task forces, expertise task forces. So they also distributed in terms of innovation, implementation, enabling environments, and capacity building, collaboration, stakeholder engagement, and support to deal further with these issues. So TNA also partly looking at enabling environments, so it's partly also there. It is also present in the support, but mainly in the implementation team. Now, what is this about? The team is not only about technology needs assessment, but it is sort of looking broader at the perspective of access and deployment and dissemination and implementation of technology through various processes, nationally determined contribution, key political process. We have long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategy, needs assessment, national adaptation plans, roadmaps, and other relevant policies. So this is basically the bulk of processes we try to enhance in order to accelerate implementation of technologies in the developing countries. Now, there are a couple of work streams discussed at the present period currently, and first was the undertaking and updating of TNAs, and we will look further where we stand with this, and a little bit look at the history, and then also promoting alignment of TNAs with mainly in mitigation and NDCs, but also partly in adaptation, but mainly mitigation, and also looking at national adaptation plans in terms of adaptation to increase coherence between the implementation of those plans with national strategies. Then also looking at TNA guidelines and trying to updating them. Also, the methodology of TNAs is considered very mature and very well developed, as this is one of the oldest processes in the convention, which started at the beginning of millennium, basically. So we have almost reaching 2 decades of work on needs assessment since the Jeff first recognized the importance of support this effort done in developing countries. Now, if you look a little bit deeper, we come down to the earth with the helicopter. We see the deliverables of the process. Basically, we look at the sector and technology identification, both in mitigation and adaptation. We look at analyzing barriers and enabling framework report. We look at technology action plans, which also includes a numerous pre-developed project ideas by country-driven efforts, means by developing countries themselves. And we also see a guidance which was developed by Technology Executive Committee in collaboration with UNEP, DTU, and the Secretariat on preparing such action plans. And there were 2 of them. One is including also monitoring, which is going to be done in the near future, first time for previous phases of TNA, where we stand with this realization of these good project ideas, which are in deliverable number 3. Technology action plans. Now, if you look again, what we have reached only, and this is only from 2011, we have 99 countries supported with more than $25 million of JEF financing undertaking their technology needs assessment. Prior to that 2011, there was sort of first generation of TNAs, which was also composing about almost 100 TNAs. Some of them are done twice by the same country. So it's we take into account also evolving needs, because needs in technologies are evolving as the technologies are evolving themselves, and the countries are developing further, so the needs evolving. So of course we don't consider reports from 2002 very actual today. Therefore, there is a need that the country steps come back into the TNA train and maybe look at how their need evolved and reporting again. This is basically a global map of the effort, which is very nice in terms of the large countries you can see, but maybe somebody from other speakers will complement me. We don't have in Secretariat the report of Brazil and India, but the rest is we have covered the globe, and focus now is on the least developed countries and small island development states. That's with phase 3 and also phase 4, which is upcoming. Now, Secretariat is synthesizing technology needs assessment in a sort of like a tranches as they come. And we did 4 synthesis reports since the beginning of the process. The last one is prepared to step into to be presented to parties at the next subsidiary body sessions within the subsidiary body for implementation. So perhaps next year. And we've been pleased to synthesize or compile and synthesize reports of 53 non-Annex 1 parties, which is looking at phase 1 and phase 2 of the current global TNA project, so both. And actually, we had 21 parties from Africa, 18 from Asia Pacific, and 40 from Latin America and Caribbean, which we look at. And I will show you by the end of my presentation a slide where you can see at our homepage where the report is located. And we have, if we look at the Asia and Pacific, for example, and Subash was already presenting that, we see a vast majority of report or needs assessed in mitigation in energy supply and consumption, and followed by agriculture in terms of mainly energy production, and waste and industry, that's the mitigation sectors. And also in these sectors, the technologies are considered a need. And in adaptation sectors, agriculture and water, and mainly in relation of water scarcity, and agriculture in relation of weather or climate resistant crops were dominating, and followed by infrastructure settlement, health, climate conservation, early warning system, and others such as coastal zones. So again, this is where the technology needs were considered were prioritized by developing countries. Now, we also produce within Technology Executive Committee a series of policy briefs where we try to promote whatever we found in this process. So we look at experiences, lessons learned, good practices that countries are performing and did in order that others are learning from it. Not only other countries, but also other stakeholders, other investors, other academia and NGOs and people who are first work with tech directly in terms of, let's say, what we have is a strong group of observers which are attending the meetings and also contributing to the work. And also we can report back to parties where we stand. So we try to describe gaps, challenges, good practices of the implementation process. We provide overview of such good practices, deliver examples of ways to enhance implementation, and offer some recommendations. So let's take a look on gaps and challenges, what we found so far in the TNA process. We still face a certain lack of domestic capacities to facilitate not undertaking the report, but mainly looking further, what to do with well pre-identified projects, how to implement them. We see some limited access to funding sources in some developing countries, including also LDCs, some smaller involvement of funding institutions in the early stages of preparation of project proposals. Implementation-oriented approaches are sometimes not sufficiently considered. Basically, TNA is done, and then sometimes not further efforts are thought. And also, sometimes funders engage with TNA teams, and slight mismatch between priorities in some cases, donors and countries. If we look at the good practices, on the other side, we have a couple of good activities drafted by countries in Asia. For example, this I choose from phase 1, 3 countries, Bhutan, Taiwan, Mongolia, which prioritize intelligent transport system, Thailand precision farming, decision support system, freeware, and Mongolia renewable energy efficient technologies. Now they had perform concrete activities using TAP for further discussions and work with the CTCN for training, field visits, additional training on developing NAMA. In terms of Thailand, the TNA was successfully incorporated into climate change national plan. In terms of Mongolia, a bank was stepping into process with a loan program within energy efficiency, which was basically materializing in the country. And they also receive funding from the Green Climate Fund of 20 million to extend its existing business law program within renewable and energy efficiency technologies. We had activities in Lebanon and Jordan. This is combination of phase 1 and phase 2, looking at harvesting rainwater to make up for lack of precipitation. The 3 project by UNDP and the Ministry of Environment for harvesting rainwater from greenhouse roofs. Then in Jordan, grassland management pilot project funded by the Jehl. And we have dozens of these activities, which we are happy to report further to parties. Not only those mentioned, of course, that's a global project. I only picked up a couple of from Asia. Now, we also agreed with the parties in a numerous discussion through negotiations and also expert group of the TEC that there are many ways to enhance this implementation of TNA, and further effort should be seen there. So first is the engagement of stakeholders and ministries during the TNA and post-TNA phase to include prioritized technology, the governmental programs, further linking with other processes where the implementations are highly possible, such as NDCs, looking at NAMAs, NAPs, collaborating further with the Global Environment Facility and Green Climate Fund, and also to mainstream these outcomes further, and to also increase its chance that is recognized and that is worked further and supported. Look at the pilot project to demonstrate technology options with the technical support and advice from CTCN, and also financial support, which is out there, and there are a couple of financial streams available for this. Engage possible funders for TAP activities in the early stage of the TNA TAP process. Also, more maybe also in collaboration with CTCN, looking at whatever can be submitted to funding mechanisms under the convention. And we still consider, and this is for me very important message, that there was proof that when equipped and trained champion was working with the TNA project further, that often resulted in a success in terms of implementation. So we see that role very important. Now, also some recommendation. This policy brief is also available on our webpage. There is this needs for further promotion of TNA's results, which we also do now for all of you connected, as endorsed by the countries themselves, and as representing the current need in terms of technologies, what country consider they want mostly. Then also we see introduction of TNA results to experts from relevant bodies, also engaging ministries of finance of countries to promote it to the, or using the word mainstreaming it to government, that in order to be aware of this, and because they may also use the results when they further enhancing environments, looking at laws, looking at regulations. And also what we consider needed is a further tracking of implementation of TNA results, because we do not know on all of them, which will happen in case we don't receive a feedback from countries. We may not know that a good project was realized in some country, and we would like to know it more and more in order to show it to another countries in order for possible replications as a good example. So this is our web, which is operating unfccc.int TT clear, and in the web I just showing you whatever you find under the TNA hat from overview, project, success stories, guidance, outcome, looking at NDC with the view of collaborating further with the initiatives such as NDC partnership or NDC dialogue to show to the NDC community whatever we reached within technology, and to promote it further, and also to learn from NDC community how more let's say leverage funding can be reached for our process. You can see the reports, including synthesis report and other documents. You can see also on our webpage the policy briefs which we are doing. The one which I just mentioned is an internal number 13 for your easy orientation, and it will be published in the next weeks. And also history of the process. So by this, I'm happy to stand connected to receive your questions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Vladimir. Armenia is a non-Annex 1 party to the convention and is regularly implementing obligations pursuant to its status. The share of emissions of Armenia to global emissions is small, and it is currently estimated to be around 0.02% of the global level. Armenia ratified the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in May 1993, Kyoto Protocol in 2002, and Paris Agreement in 2017. Armenia submitted its INDC to the UNFCCC Secretariat in 2015 and will submit its initial NDC in 2020. The fourth national communication on climate change of the Armenia was developed and submitted in 2020 according to the UNFCCC guidelines. National Inventory Report of Armenia is updated as of 2017. Third biennial update report is currently under development. The NDC covering the period of 2021-2030 is also under development and is based on the principles of green economy. The main consideration taken into account by the government when updating the NDC are to maintain the growth of national economy, poverty reduction, achievement of sustainable development goals, while increasing national energy security and ensuring affordable and clean energy supply. Armenia prepared greenhouse gas inventory from 1990 to 2017 in accordance with the 2006 IPCC guidelines. Armenian greenhouse gas emissions in 2017 were 10,600 gigagrams CO2 equivalent, excluding forestry and other land use. Total emissions in 2017 were 3% higher than those in 2016, approximately 59% or 15.2 million tons below the 1990 emissions level and about 69% higher than 2000 emission level. The energy sector is by far the largest producer of greenhouse gas emissions. In 2017, the energy sector accounts for 67% of Armenia's total greenhouse gas emissions. The energy sector includes emissions from all uses of fuel to generate energy, including fuel used in transport and the fugitive emissions related to the transmission, storage, and distribution of natural gas. Scaling up renewable energy program for Armenia settles two objectives: 21% of renewable energy sources in total power generation by 2020 and 26% by 2025, with specific targets by technology. Recent legislative reforms, amendments to the ERA laws, along with tariff policy, solar PV construction investment programs, and hydro energy development concept aimed to promoting renewable energy generation. Technology need assessment project was implemented in 2016-2017 and was supported by the Global Environmental Fund, implemented by United Nations Environment Program, and executed by the UNEP DTU partnership. More than 50 technologies were proposed and assessed of both adaptation and mitigation during the TNA process in Armenia, and 20 technologies have been prioritized, including 6 adaptation and 14 mitigation technologies. High was the quality rating awarded to Armenia by regional experts after the terminal evaluation of the UNEP GEF project, TNA Phase 2 in 2019. The TNA reports were elaborated based on the technological fact sheets, multi-criteria analysis, and other unique approaches, guidebooks, and other methodologies developed by UNEP DTU partnership. 3 reports were elaborated: technology prioritization, barrier analysis and an enabling framework, and technology action plan for adaptation and mitigation technologies comprising project ideas. Adaptation prioritized sectors and technologies were as follows: agriculture sector, windbreaks as climate change adaptation tool, local melioration and low volume drip irrigation for newly planted orchards, diversification of agriculture. In water sector, there were creation of circulatory water system for fisheries, installation of compact treatment plants, application of natural and hybrid treatment systems, spreading and expansion of drip irrigation systems. 4 sectors were prioritized in mitigation sector. The technologies of the energy sector are as follows: cogeneration, small-scale combined heat and power production, improving energy efficiency in multi-apartment buildings, registry creation and development, mandatory realization of the industrial energy audit as a mitigation component, reactive capacity power compensation in the Armenian electric energy system, correspondence to natural gas tariff structure to the methodology approved by the decision of Public Service Regulation Commission. In energy sector, production of synthetic rubber from butadiene, instead using natural gas in chemical production, production and usage of photoluminescent materials with long-term lightening, new type of entirely plastic solar water heaters. In land use sector, degraded grasslands, radical improvement, sustainable forest management, new technology of cultivation of perennial plants. In waste management, prioritized technologies were utilization of methane from Yerevan city landfill for electricity and heat production, existing Lusakert biogas plant operation and reissuance organizational technology, complex processing of Arctic mining waste. TAPs published and dissemination. Developed action plans have been published. Within the framework of the implementation of various programs, the representation of action plans were included in the agenda of the discussions organized by many communities in Armenia. Action plans have been provided to the municipalities, NGOs, and other entities. The guidelines for the preparation of technological action plan was developed, published, and provided to the interested parties. The following principles have been adopted for future. The technologies described in the TAPs should be provided to all donor organizations for funding. Ideas of the technologies should be included in other project proposals. Some of the projects are ongoing till now. Those are establishment of windbreak and water protection belts, state funding, installation of waste water compact treatment plants, and application of natural and hybrid treatment system, private sector, de-risking and scaling up investment in energy efficient building retrofits, United Nations development programs, and other implemented by state and private support private sector. There are also programs comprising TNA project ideas, such as Arctic City closed stone peat waste and flood management pilot project, strengthening land-based adaptation capacity in communities adjacent to protecting areas in Armenia, both implemented by Adaptation Fund, alternative use of water resources in the field of fish production in Armenia, implemented by UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and many others. For instance, the project of tap for natural gas tariff structure change technology can be presented as follows. Before 2017, there were only 2 natural gas consumer categories. But after TNA implementation, these categories are 5 based on end uses as well. It is important that the fugitive emissions of natural gas subcategory is the 2nd largest source of emissions in energy sector. Post-installation, post-project institutionalization mechanism to ensure continuation. As mentioned in terminal evaluation of UNEP Jehl project TNA phase 2, during the implementation of the TNA in Armenia, it became clear that the number of potentially important technologies was more than what could be covered by the project. Thus, it was necessary to address these via National Climate Technology Mechanism, Armenian Climate Technology Center and Network, ARM-CTCN. ARM-CTCN is a national inventory system, a grid-like national directory, catalog of technologies in all spheres for climate change mitigation and adaptation. The experience and practice of the TNA were the basis for establishing the ARM-CTCN. After the completion of TNA phase 2, with the support of UNIDO, a program was implemented in Armenia, within the framework of which ARM-CTCN consortium and the roadmap were formed. Armenia NDA on CTCN activity and Armenian CTCN consortium members are currently considering state registration for the facility. ARM-CTCN cooperates with the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of the Republic of Armenia. The NDC covered the period of 2021-2030, is under development, and is based on the principles of green economy. Leveraged by the Paris Agreement, the NDC have a high priority in the national climate change strategies as part of Armenia's international commitments, and it is felt that TNA TAP can provide accurate input for the NDC. The main consideration taken into account by the government when updating the NDC are to maintain the growth of national economy, poverty reduction, achievement of sustainable development goals, while increasing national energy security, ensuring affordable and clean energy supply. The new unconditional mitigation target to be achieved in 2030 equals from 40 to 50% reduction below 1990 emission level. Thank you for your attention. I will let the floor to Sivanappan. Please, Professor Kumar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tigran. This is Sivanappan Kumar from the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. As way of introduction, AIT was the regional center for Asia and the CIS for the TNA project during the 3 phases since 2009. In today's presentation, I would like to present the regional center's perspective on 2 issues. First is the work carried out by the regional center, and second, our observations on the overall TNA process, activities, outputs, and then few lessons. Hopefully, these can be useful inputs and references for the coming phase. As you can see from this slide, AIT supported 17 countries in the TNA process in the 3 phases. And in this current phase, the countries involved are Afghanistan and Myanmar. As can be seen, all regions of Asia have been involved in the TNA process so far. Overall, if you look at the sectors and technologies that have been prioritized, Subash and Vladimir have given full details. To summarize, in mitigation, the sectors majorly shortlisted were energy, transport, and waste, And in the case of the technologies, renewable energy technologies, notably solar, biomass, microhydro, were preferred or prioritized. While in energy efficiency area, improving energy efficiency of devices and processes were the preferred technologies. In adaptation, the participating countries' interests have generally been in water and agriculture, and the prioritized technologies were in improved irrigation techniques, selection of crops, efficient farming systems, etc. Now, as a regional center, AIT was involved in building capacity of the national experts and consultants of the participating countries. This was done through the regional capacity building workshops. The workshops had specific modules on technology needs assessment, on barrier analysis and enabling framework, and the technology action plans and project ideas. These trainings were conducted by experts from UNEP, UDP, UNFCCC, AIT, and others. This included presentations, discussions, and hands-on workout sessions in groups, either on a country level or on a theme basis. So this was expected to provide much clearer guidelines to the participants as they would later work with their respective groups in the countries. The Regional Center AIT was also involved in providing technical support to the participating countries. This was, for example, through specific missions to the countries, and typically there was at least one mission to each country. Based on the need and by the request of the countries, additional support was also provided. Such support was in the form of assistance in the preparation of technology fact sheets for specific technologies, and also through the help desk facility at AIT. Another important work of the regional center was supporting the countries through reviewing their country reports related to the three major areas: the technology needs assessment report, the barrier analysis and enabling framework report, and the technology action plan and project ideas report. Typically, this involved 2 reviews of each report, and detailed and specific comments on the content, process, methodology, and outputs were provided to the countries. And as noted by earlier speakers, these reports are publicly available in the TNA website. Additionally, AIT assisted the UDP partnership in the review of the guidebooks that were prepared to help the participating countries in conducting the TNA. Also, AIT helped UDP to organize global workshops, such as the experience sharing workshop after the first phase of the TNA, and the global launch of the third phase of the TNA project, both at Bangkok. These provided good platforms for the participating countries to learn from others on the measures undertaken. More importantly, AIT, as a member of the CTCN, the Climate Technology Center and Network, also has assisted the participating countries in a variety of ways in addressing the climate change mitigation and adaptation issues, specifically through capacity building and incubator workshops. Some countries that have made use of our expertise include Bangladesh, Nepal, Timor-Leste, and others. Coming to the observations, the regional center typically works with the countries during the capacity building workshops and in the review of the reports. So regarding the capacity building workshops, over the years, the challenges typically faced were on the time available for the training, the number of persons trained per country, and the guidance material for the training. Now, over the years, this whole process has seen a lot of improvements, with additional guidebooks with greater details made available, and more time provided for the workshops, as well as the organization of the experience sharing workshops. As a regional center, we have provided inputs to UDP and included more hands-on exercises in the workshops, and have assisted the countries with their specific requests. For example, in-country trainings as well. In case of review of TNA reports, typically each report goes through 2 reviews by the regional center, and from our observations, We normally give very detailed comments on the report, looking at the process, the analysis done, and the discussions. The quality of the reports from all the countries is not always uniform, and obviously the role of the expert consultant and the national coordinator is very important in ensuring the report quality. As mentioned earlier, the number of persons trained during the regional training workshops is typically 3 per country. The coordinator and 1 person each for mitigation and adaptation. It would be useful to train more persons who could help in the smooth conduction of the prioritization of the technologies in the working groups in the countries. Secondly, when we review the reports, we sometimes observe the limited involvement of the financial sector or private sector personnel in the working groups. So, additional trainings could be conducted in the countries where more persons could be trained, and more involvement of the private and financial sector would be more helpful. It's also important to highlight that overall, the time schedule that was followed in conducting the project activities was sufficient. This was made possible also due to the fact that countries used existing working groups and committees, so there was no sort of reinventing the wheel. For example, in the current phase, the sectors were practically selected at the start of the project. Post TNA, the outputs of TNA, namely the barrier analysis report, the technology action plans, and project ideas, should help to improve the enabling environment by promoting the technologies under question, as well as by the initiation of new projects and programs with either local funding, private sector, or through international funding. Though some details are available from some countries when they present their results during the experience sharing workshops, the fullest extent of this aspect are not generally available. For example, earlier, 2 examples were provided by Dr. Subash from Indonesia and Pakistan. Such examples will be of immense use for the countries as they start the TNA. So this brief presentation basically summarizes the work done by the Regional Center AIT and our observations. My sincere thanks to you for listening to this presentation, and I would like to thank my colleagues, Professor Rajendra Shrestha and Dr. Abdul Salam, for their work and support. Now, hence, Radschinski from UNFCCC Bangkok will take the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon and good morning to the colleagues in different parts of the world. I believe there is actually some of you might already be ahead of us here in Korea, so good evening to you. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Emerson Resende. I'm a climate policy specialist at the Green Climate Fund. And at this presentation, I will try to provide you a little bit of an update about the Green Climate Fund and the status of our portfolio, and of course focus on the core of this, which is our support for climate technologies and technology needs assessment activities in the area of Asia Pacific. I will be very quick with my first slides, but I'm aware that this presentation will be made available to all the attendees, so you'll be able to consult all this data, all this information that is here at your own pace later on. So please forgive me if I pass too quickly over the slides. A little bit of a quick history of the GCF. Some people might not be very aware, but the GCF, which was established about 10 years ago at the COP16 Cancun, we approved our first project only in 2015. So all those years between 2010 and 2015 were the time to get basically the organization up and running. As you might imagine, that lots of things are necessary to get such a complex organization ready to approve and disperse resources for projects. So the first project, as I said, was approved at the end of 2015. And in the last 5 years, we have approved a large number of projects, 129 projects in more than 100 countries. And I think the core of our work, which is important to remember everybody, is that we are an organization that is country driven. What does it mean? It means that the way we fund projects and activities on the ground is responding to requests coming from developing countries. And it's important to remind this because sometimes we get questions about why we're not funding these kind of things, these kind of technologies. As long as they are aligned with our investment areas, as long as they are country driven, we will be looking at all the proposals that we receive. So these are the 8 impact areas, the 8 investment areas. You can see the top ones in green are related to mitigation. The 4 bottom ones are related to adaptation. You have seen these throughout the presentations of the previous speakers when they addressed how TNAs are supporting activities on mitigation and adaptation. So they are aligned with these 8 areas here. A little bit of the status of the portfolio of the Green Climate Fund. As I mentioned, we have almost 130 projects approved so far in about almost 5 years, 180 countries, over $5 billion of projects approved. Some of you might also be aware that we last year were doing our first replenishment of the fund, and we were able to raise nearly $10 billion for the next 4 years. So these resources, this $10 billion will be used for what we call GCF1. And we are developing a strategy plan that is currently with our board to decide how these resources will be used in the years to come. It's important, and I'm very pleased to inform you that the issues of climate technology is an issue that is in the draft strategy plan that will be considered by the board in the coming board meetings, and we hope that that gets approved as it is, and we will continue funding climate technologies also through CTCN and our network of partner organizations. The division of our portfolio investments, as you can see, there is a quite good balance between mitigation and adaptation and what we call cross-cutting, which are projects that have elements of adaptation and mitigation. This is an important element here, the way we operate. The way the GCF disperses resources is through a network of accredited entities, partner organizations. And they are primarily divided between direct access entities, which are the number 13 and the number 43 combined. We just divide them between what are organizations that are only national, only work at the national level, and some of the organizations that work at the regional level. Organizations such UN entities that work at the international level are represented in green here. We have nearly 100 organizations around the world that are accredited to have access to GCF resources. Some of these have not yet access to the resources, but a large number have. Yet on the portfolio, Vladimir had mentioned during his presentation, one of the gaps that was identified is the access to support the financial resources by LDCs. This is something that we are often reminded by the COP through COP guidance. It's something that is very dear to the GCF. Here we are trying to give an example of illustrate how we are supporting LDC. So 26% of all our investments so far have been gone to LDCs. Seeds have received the 16% of all the bulk of our investments so far, and a large part of it, 40%, have gone to African countries. I'm not going to concentrate much here, but this gives you an idea of what kind of financial instruments we have been using. Loans and grants make the large portion of our instruments used. Grants a little bit more than loans. The GCF, as the fund matures and the fund explores new ways to make investments and develop a large bulk of partner organizations, we will be looking at expanding these instruments and also increasing the volume in some of them. For example, equity, as we identify projects that have less risk and can attract more private sector investors as well. And technology can play a great role in there as technologies get more mature, reduces risks, and can attract investors at different phases of the investment cycle. Now we approach the part that gets into more technology, so I ask you to bear with me, and I'm very conscious of my time, and I don't want to go beyond. In terms of the technology needs assessment under the Green Climate Fund, they are financed through one of our windows, which is the Readiness and Preparatory Support Program, commonly called the Readiness Program. As you can see here in this slide, we have approved over $200 million in readiness projects for 138 countries around the world. I remind you that every country in the world can have access to up to $1 million per year per country for a range of readiness activities. I will repeat that information. Each developing country that can access the GCF can have up to $1 million per year per country for readiness activities. And these $1 million renewed every year. And that is done through the nationally designated authority. Let's get into technology now. That is the part why we came here for. I'm very pleased to inform some of you that might not be aware of this work. The GCF has been mandated by the board, the Secretariat has been mandated by the board to develop an approach for incubators and accelerators. This initially was a discussion that was going to be done through a request for proposals. That has been put on hold as the fund entered a new strategic plan development, but the Secretariat did not want to wait, and in attending the request of the fund, we engaged our private sector facility, which is currently developing this, what we call climate innovation facility, which is an approach for supporting climate technologies through incubators and accelerators. You can see here different colors. On the left-hand side, you see a stage 1, then a stage 2, and a stage 3. We're talking about incubators, we're talking about accelerators, and we're talking about a growth fund. Right now, we are in the process of developing stage 1, the incubators. We are in contact with one accredited entity that has demonstrated interest in developing a funding proposal in bringing that to the GCF, hopefully by the last board meeting of the year. Let's talk now about the readiness support for technology. And you can see here on the sides of your screens, the big numbers in green. So far, we have approved 24 readiness proposals for supporting technology. A large number of them is via CTCN. This is in excess of $8 million combined. Average ticket is something between $200,000 and $300,000 for each project. You can see there is a balance of regions, and we on the screen, and Latin America, you see 2 there. We noticed that the pipeline has a larger number of Latin American readiness requests for technology, and probably that number will increase in the coming months as well. Let me give you some examples, and I'm getting to the final part of my presentation about some of the latest GCF approved support for technology needs assessments in Asia Pacific. These 3 countries here, they are the proposals that we approved. They're fairly similar, in particular the Iraq one and the one for Syria. And countries are trying, first of all, to understand the landscape for supporting the developments of TNAs, and primarily they're focusing on 4 sectors: agriculture, energy, water, and resilience. You can see the average tickets in the middle of your screen as well. And average, the project runs for about 18 months. I think these are important piece of information for those of you that are considering developing proposals, readiness proposals, and bringing that forward to the GCF. All this information is available in the website. This particular slide, if you click on the name of the country, once you receive my presentation at the end of this webinar, if you click on the name of the country, that will take you to the document in our website that refers exactly to that proposal approved with all the details. That can be a good source of reference as well. And final slide, our conclusions here. I kept it very short and sweet. We understand that it's important to enhance the coordination at the country level between the NDE and the NDA, the nationally designated entity, which deals with technology, and the national designated authority, which is the focal point for the Green Climate Fund, and of course the TNA coordinator. These actors must be working together in close collaboration to make sure that the proposals that come to the GCF do not have to go through a countless number of forth and back, and to the point that it's detrimental to the country. It's also important to enhance the level of ambition and look for transformative technologies once submitting proposals to the GCF. Why is that? And I'll try to be very clear here. As we have a very large number of countries to support around the world, and the number of resources that the GCF have available at its disposal for supporting countries, these resources are limited. We need to make sure that we are supporting the proposals that are ambitious and are transformative. And naturally, that will be a competition for resources. And I'm not saying that the competition is between countries, not necessarily. Sometimes the competition is within the country. So it's very important to, again, have this coordination done and have a very high level of ambition once the proposal is submitted to the GCF, demonstrating what kind of transformative technologies and what kind of outputs that proposal will produce at the end of the project. And finally, the last bullet, which represents this diagram here, is this long-term vision and linkage with the NDC. CP stands for Country Program, EWP stands for Entity Work Program, and FP stands for Funding Proposal, as it is described in the diagram. So the readiness support the GCF provides for TNAs must produce a TNA that then is linked with these three large quadrants in the diagram: GCF country programs, the NDCs, and the GCF Entity Work Program. I'm happy to provide further information about each one of these things for those that want to discuss, but this is absolutely important. We noticed that there has been some drop in the quality of the proposals of TNAs that we have received that are in the pipeline. So it's important that these TNAs make reference for continuous engagement after the end of the TNA, and that becomes reflected on these three important documents in blue here. And finally, the final outcome that we want to see is that the outcomes produced at the TNA must be carried on, as Vladimir also pointed out, to the development of a GCF funding proposal. So what you identify as a need in your TNA should then feed the development of a funding proposal that can be brought to the GCF. I finalize here my presentation. I thank everybody for your time, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome, participants. My name is Jens. I will give a quick presentation and overview of the Regional Collaboration Center of the UNFCCC based in Bangkok. The presentation looks probably at first view fairly similar to my colleagues, but I can guarantee you it's very different because we sit here in the region and we're doing okay. The RCC Bangkok is one of the 6 established regional collaboration centers of the UNFCCC Secretariat. All these centers are established with the support of host partners. So our center, as mentioned, serving the Asia Pacific region, is based in Bangkok. Most of these centers also host colleagues from the NDC partnerships or also GCF experts. In our case, we have NDC partnership regional experts hosted in the RCC. The center, and this is why I'm taking this opportunity to introduce it a little bit, is only almost 5 years old. So it's established in September 2015, hosted by the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. And it's covering quite a large region, all the way from Eurasia, Central Asia, South Asia, all the way to the Pacific. And initially, these centers, the RCCs, have been set up with the support of the CDM Executive Board to help underrepresented regions to increase attractiveness of potential CDM activities and build capacities, support existing projects, and also bring new projects into the pipeline. But of course, with the adoption of the Paris Agreement, these RCCs also have received a broader role as an extended arm of the UNFCCC Secretariat in the regions, and especially facilitating support for climate action towards countries NDCs under the agreement. And we still have a bit of a focus on markets and mechanisms. The areas of work are pretty broad, so technology, capacity building, finance, these areas of implementations are part of it. I just want to mention the two more related activities to the topic of the webinar and technology. So we strongly support CDM NDC processes, meaning we work very closely with countries and try to facilitate implementation of NDCs, especially also support countries in coming up with more specific and more ambitious NDCs. As I mentioned, the NDC partnership is on board in the office, so we also help to mobilize technical assistance from partners such as the NDC, and also through our colleagues in Bonn facilitate technical support for implementing and achieving NDCs. With regard to technology, directly, so we work with the colleagues in Bonn, also help since we are here in the region, and try to build a larger network of stakeholders in communication of products from the tech and the technology team in general, and also support regional events here in the region, such as the climate weeks. I will get to this a bit later. I want to give an example, since we were not initially part of the TNA projects and the development of TNAs, but we have here at Bangkok and also in other regions supporting the needs-based finance projects. That's a project by the UNFCCC together with other UN partner agencies, helping supporting countries in developing strategies for long-term finance here. In this region, we are working with the Melanesian Spearhead Group, but also the ASEAN members, the Indian states, island states in the Indian Ocean, least developed countries in Asia, and we are just now starting Polynesia and Central and South Asia projects. So why am I mentioning this? Because this project has several phases, and in the second phase, which comprises of technical work, mostly done by the Secretariat and also directly in the RCCs, it's basically a review of existing submissions to the UNFCCC to come up with similarities of these groups of countries that we are working with, and especially in needs expressed for finance. What we are doing, these technical assessments for the groups, a review of existing materials. The TNAs are very important for this process. So besides other submissions to the UNFCCC, such as the NDCs and BORs and NCs, the TNAs have a very important role, and I'm giving the example here of the the island state of the Indian Oceans, where we work with a group of 6 countries of which 5 of them have already done the TNA. So this gives us very important information because they are very consistent, and the methodology and the format across the countries, which really helps getting to sectors of technology needs that are expressed here in this example for our ISIO countries, as we have seen for other countries in Asia and Pacific. Energy, water, and coastal zones have been especially highlighted. Also, we're going further into the specific technologies. And also then the next step in the process after the review of existing information is a workshop where all this information will be verified. And in this case, for example, systematic observation and monitoring, and also establishment of MRB, M&E systems and technologies hubs have been expressed by the participating countries. Yeah, I'm gonna skip this one briefly because we are already a bit late. We've just started also a similar process with the ASEAN countries. The project process is more or less the same. Again, 6 of 8 countries have already submitted their TNAs, and we are right now planning, and we have workshops which have been needed to be postponed slightly. Just an overview of the submissions that we review for the process, and highlighted the TNAs that have been submitted by participating countries. Just one of the other areas, and I mentioned it already, that the RCC is working together with, as you can see from the logos, many of these partner organizations participating also in this webinar. The Asia Pacific Climate Week, so these are very important regional meetings where also a large number of organization stakeholders can get involved. We normally do have technology related activities at the Climate Weeks. I just wanted to mention also that unfortunately for this year it's been postponed, but we are looking into other opportunities of involving stakeholder on these activities. I want to give a little bit of an outlook how the RCC could be or intends to be engaged in this work of the technology team in the future. We are working very closely, for example, with the ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change. The AWGCC Action Plan has a work stream on technology transfer, and I think it's also been mentioned a couple of times, the engagements and enhanced partnerships and engagements of private sector will be very important also in implementing the TNAs and essentially the NDCs. So we intend to work under this work stream with the AWGCC. On CDM and Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, these collaborative actions and market mechanisms, there is still demand for development of new methodologies in terms of monitoring methodologies and baseline for mitigation action. So that's one of the areas of work where we can use the existing TNAs also to identify potential new areas. Same goes for NAMA development. NDC implementation, I mentioned already, we do get requests from countries, parties to support implementation, which we do with the help of the NDC partnership, but also in particular recent situations with colleagues of Bonn. And stakeholder engagement and capacity building and enhanced collaboration is one of the areas of the main areas of work of the RCCs. So we've heard quite a lot in the region that there is a lack of capacity for project funding proposals. So we are working with partners and networks also to provide capacity building in this regard. We see that there is a role also in the future, and that's been mentioned by my colleague Vladimir, tracking of the implementation of TNA results, since we are in the region and working with networks and stakeholders in the region. We see that there's a good area of future engagement. I mentioned already, and climate weeks I have also mentioned on previous slides. Yep, I'm at the end of my presentation. I think you will all be able to receive these slides. They will be online available. So if there are any questions, I'll be very happy if you would like to contact the RCC. And with this, I'm finishing and closing my presentation. I'd like to give back to our colleagues from UNEP DTU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens. So thank you very much to everyone for this interesting presentation. I have received quite a lot of interesting questions from the audience. I have a first question to Subash. So we could see in your graphs that there was a timeline until 2023. So is there a new phase? Is there a new TNA phase coming up soon?
Yes, there is the TNA phase 4, which will be starting this year, as I mentioned, and most of the countries are in the Asia Pacific region. And you can see in my presentation the countries which should be a part of this phase.
Thank you. And we also have a question in relation to these TNAs. Are there any plans to expand these activities to Africa? Subash.
Yeah, there was actually a webinar in April for the African countries, and the TNA phase is a global, you can say. So there will be countries from Africa also in this phase, but this phase is only for the LDCs and SIDS. So only LDCs and SIDS are part of this phase.
Okay, thank you. And one last question for you, Subash. Regarding the GCF funds, while you are doing the TNA report and the TNA process, is there any help in terms of capacity building that is being provided to countries so that they can develop TNAs that are in line with GCF funding?
Yes, we have over the period of this project tried to become more and more focused on implementation and make the technology action plans more sharper. And we have within the technology action plans a component on proposal development, for which we all have the training along with the technology action plans. And so there is a focus, and we do try to basically cover within this training, use the GCF sometimes templates for training purposes. And we have also, as an organization, UDP has also provided training in preparation of GCF concept notes using support from the CTCN.
Thank you. A question to you, Vladimir. Can you elaborate on the sometimes mismatch that there is between countries' TNA's results and the donors' preferences? Do you have example? And can this mismatch be resolved by any means provided by the UNFCCC or other initiatives in order to minimize the finance gaps that can happen for the technology's implementation?
Yeah, thank you for this question. That's basically, there are many examples of cases. It comes naturally as, for example, a certain mitigation technology is identified as a priority, and an example is that the donor is not ready to provide financing for the technology due to various reasons that can be from political until different stages of legislation. We may have in terms of quite specific cases, like in terms of renewable energies, we may, for example, miss security in payback by investors, missing instruments such as feed-in tariffs in countries that no one then is, for example, willing to invest into wind energy and etc. So that doesn't say that this mismatch is constant. That say that if such a cases appear, then it's up to the champion behind the specific project and the financing or funding community in a country to discuss these issues, because we don't see TNA as a tool immediately to disseminate specific technology in a country, but that can serve also, and I mentioned that in my presentation, to, for example, deliver a pilot project which can serve as a first project in a country, or piloting effort, which can be then later on with good experiences further replicated. That's one thing. Second, TNA can also serves to build such regulations and legislation. So we may have this closing existing gaps in terms of enabling environment. We may have a project to enhance existing regulation to allow such a implementation in future, etc. So that was one example, but of course there can be many also in adaptation technologies where donors may not be having experiences to put money into sometime very long-term return in investment bringing adaptation efforts. So but again, this is the starting position, and there is a room to discuss such issues between the donors and the one who comes with an idea. Usually countries endorse efforts.
Thank you. I have a question for Professor Kumar. So in your opinion, is one round of capacity building exercise sufficient to make a visible difference, or is there a need for more number of rounds with the same participants? Yes, and if there is the need of more capacity building, how to address this need given the constraints of funds and resources? Thank you.
Yeah, as I mentioned, normally for the capacity building workshops, we have only one person who comes for either mitigation and for adaptation. And normally they have to go back and talk to the sector working groups and the technology working groups. So sometimes it may be quite difficult for them to do the complete work. So in that sense, having workshops probably in the countries, or having more people join the workshop is one solution. But again, there are quite a number of guidebooks now which have been developed, which again helps in addressing this particular issue. But I think regarding the funding aspects, I think you should talk to the TNA coordinator.
Thank you. I have two last questions before closing this webinar. So Rubik, a question for you. So is it acceptable for the governments in the TNA process to share their data with third parties or consultants? So when consultants are doing their TNA, how is the process with this collaboration with the governments in terms of data sharing?
Okay, 1 minute. I will translate for Mr. Chilton.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, he didn't clearly understand the question. So should I repeat and you would say if it's okay or not?
Yes.
So the question is, how is the collaboration between government and third parties is elaborated, right?
Yes, so mainly, if I understood well the question, how how is the collaboration with the teams elaborating TNA reports and the persons at the government? How is the data being shared between these parties?
You mean during the period when EPIU implemented the TNA project, right?
Yes, if you're preparing in this process of TNA.
I see. Now I will translate. 1 minute.
Իսկ եթե դա եղել է վերապրծիչի անենք կարել եւ եղել է որ պարտադիր ենք կառավարություն ներկայացնում են երամսյա հաշվետվություն կատարված ծրագրերի վերաբերյալ եւ ֆինանսական.
So he says that when the implementators, the contractors in the project needed the information from governmental, any ministries or other organizations, EPIU supports them and in a formal level asks the information from the relevant organizations and afterwards provides them with the information with the consent of our director and his or her signature. And if they needed information regarding the EPIU, with the consent of our director, the information was provided to the project experts. I think this would be satisfactory.
Thank you very much. The last question I will conclude at the same time because we had someone from the audience asking if there was any TNA report in the specific field of agriculture. We have, because agriculture is a main sector prioritized in Asia Pacific, many reports on that specific sector. And you can find all these reports updated and downloaded on the TNA website, which you can find the link here on this slide. So I think it's time to close this webinar. So thank you very much to the speakers for the interesting presentation and for the audience as well. So you will find the recording of this webinar as well as the presentations online in a few days. If you have any question regarding TNAs in Asia Pacific, please feel free to contact Subash and Sarah, who is the Global TNA Project Manager. Thank you very much, everyone, for your presence and participation, and I wish you a very good day or evening. Bye.